There we go. So we are recording now. Great. Okay. If you want to say anything during the meeting, you know, it's such a shame that this isn't a face-to-face, because when we've delivered meetings in the past, it's always been very informal and people have got the opportunity to just sort of ask questions whenever they want. So please feel free to do that. You can use your hand up function on Zoom. I would have liked to have had individual introductions from everybody. But I think with the amount, we have had 40 people sign up for the meeting. So with the amount of people, if you could, it would be fantastic if you could put into the chat function, because we're going to save that after the meeting, your name, what organisation you're from, because I know that some organisations here are people from the conservation land management side, and we've got a lot of activity providers here tonight. And if you could just say a little bit about, you know, where you operate and what activities that you deliver, that would be really helpful, because part of today is getting a bit of a sort of an idea of who and where people are using in this particular area. Great. So in terms of the purpose of the meeting tonight, we're going to introduce the work that we're doing and put that into the wider context of the Ynys Cybi Landscape Partnership Scheme and where it fits as one of their projects. It's to start a bit of a dialogue between those who manage the area and those that operate in it, because really across North Wales, we don't do that very well for many of the venues, and there might be some informal conversations that go on, but there's certainly not a kind of collaborative movement towards those that are managing and conserving areas and those that are using it. We're going to share some information on why this particular area is special. You know, we love North Wales, but some areas are more special in terms of their wildlife designations than others, or heritage designations. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. We've got some other contributions. We've got Elvin, who's going to share from the BMC about some of the lessons learned from the work that they've done on the island as well, in terms of climbing and hill walking. And also, like I say, understand more about how the area is used, so that we can hear from people that are operating from an activity point of view. But also then we're going to talk about the need for a code of conduct, or what the code of conduct is, and you know, why it is that it's come about that we're going to develop something like this for the island, and then gain feedback from yourselves on what the sort of the content that we're thinking of putting into it, and just get a feel for sort of how that would be received. Right, I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to hand over to Evan. So then if Evan can share a little bit about the Ynys Cybi Landscape Partnership Scheme, and I'll just admit a few more people. Okay. Can you share whilst can you start sharing now, Evan?
Yeah. There we go. Noswaith, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you to Catherine for organising the meeting. I hope it's the start of something that we can work together on as we move forward. The Holy Island Landscape Partnership came about many years ago now, but we're actually now in the delivery phase. It's taken a while for us to get here. And there's the team that are working on this, myself as the programme manager, Beth Ann Morris, who is in the call as well, and then we have an admin assistant, Samantha, who is helping us out 2.5 days a week. We are, I'm pleased to say, now operating out of the Market Hall in Holyhead, so we have a base on Ynys Cybi as well. And obviously we're a partnership, although we're managed by the council. In essence, we are a wider partnership. So as part of that partnership, I noticed we have Laura from the RSPB, who is one of the site managers that will be working on this as we move forward. So the Landscape Partnership is a £2 million project. We are working over 4 years. Initially, when it started, it was supposed to come to an end in 2023. We're working with the lottery now, and it's coming to a conclusion in 2025. Working with local communities, working with local businesses, local land managers, across a range of programme of activities, looking at local needs, with an emphasis on the landscape heritage and Ynys Cybi in its entirety, so not one just particular area. It's working over Ynys Cybi. You'll see there the the aims and objectives of what we're trying to do. So it's to manage the key features of the island's natural heritage and key features, so the built heritage. So we're currently, or we have been working up on Mynydd Tŵr, looking at the hut circles up there. We are working with local landowners to understand, or to gain an understanding of sustainable land management and heathland management as we move forward. And then obviously, because we're being funded through the Visitor Gateway programme through ERDF, we are there to help promote Ynys Cybi to the wider visitor as well. So as I said, it's Ynys Cybi in its entirety. This piece of work, and Catherine will touch on it, I'm sure, is more focused towards the range and Mynydd Tŵr and the activities where coastal activities are taking place. So I guess if we're looking at kayaking, then Roscollin and that area would be part of it as well. Range of activities, environmental, looking, as I said, at sustainable heathland management, educational. We have a programme of educational activities that we're working with the local schools on. We are working with the communities. We're engaged with the town and community councils throughout Ynys Cybi, and we are promoting heritage and outdoor activities, as you can see. The partners in the programme range from Môn Communities Forward, Wildlife Trust, Menter Iaith Menter Môn, Gwynedd Archaeological Trust, Cadw are there, RSPB are there as well, and the council obviously working very closely with the AONB and Countryside team. We have a range of working groups. We've slimmed it down to 5 from the original 7, and one of those is an activity working group. So we will be working with some of you who are doing activities on Ynys Cybi as we move forward. The aim is to bring key stakeholders together, and we can discuss a range of topics outside of the normal partnership meeting, and we can also help monitor and manage some of the projects through the working groups as we move forward. Some of you might have seen some of the projects we've started. So the Café Cybi is a series of online meetings that we have once a month. We've had our 2 last week, looking at the hut circles and some of the work that the Wildlife Trust have been doing through its youth groups as well. As I said, we've done some work on the hut circles and Capel Llochwydd and Mynydd Tŵr. We currently have 2 interpretation projects running. So one is for the visitor centre at the Breakwater Country Park, which is due to be remodelled soon, and then the Ynys Cybi wider interpretation projects, and the company that's taking those forward is Headland, and I'm sure they'll be talking to some of you as we go forward. Guided walks, Bethan arranged a number of guided walks in September. We will be planning more walks starting in April. And then we also have the small grants for businesses, which was last year relatively successful. Small amount of grants available to help businesses promote the Welsh language aspects of their business. And that one will be re-advertised later on in the spring, I think. And that's it from me. So as I said, that's me, Evan Milner, and then Bethan Morris. You can find out more details from our landscape, from our Facebook page, Twitter, and obviously we have a web page within the Anglesey County Council itself, but easy to find now. And that's us. Diolch yn fawr.
There we go. Diolch yn fawr. That's great. I think you know, we're going to talk about some of the training that will take part in some of this the project, but in terms of our piece of work. But some of the sessions that you've delivered as well would be of interest to some of the providers. So in terms of them finding out when they are, is there a newsletter they can sign up to, or is it mainly the Facebook page where events and things would be advertised?
Bethan, we do have a newsletter, but it normally comes out just after we've been doing stuff. So, but the website would be the best way, but we are looking for better ways of how we can get our message out.
Okay, great.
Bethan,
If anyone is interested in joining our distribution list, then if they either drop me an email or send an email to the partnership, which was on the presentation and is on the website, then I can arrange for that to happen.
Great, thank you. Does anybody have any questions on the scheme itself? If at any point people do, feel free to just drop something in the chat, or you've got the contact details of Bethan and Evan.
Yeah, so you were saying, Evan, that you're based in Holyhead Town Hall?
Mute. You're on mute, Evan.
Market Hall, sorry.
Market Hall, okay. Does that mean that it's a drop-in? Can you walk in and have a chat with you guys, or?
Yes, you can. It'd be easier just to make sure that we're there if you gave us a ring or dropped us an email.
Cool.
But we are quite happy to be there and meet up with anybody who wants to talk to us.
Okay, excellent.
Great. Anything else? Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. If I seem at all distracted, it's because people do keep arriving at the meeting, which is great. And I've just written down we've got 37 participants, but actually I loved seeing that we've actually got 38 because there's a baby involved as well. It's always nice to see. Geth Roberts. Well, extra points for bringing along your baby. Great. Okay, so I'll just head back to the work that we're doing on the project. So here we go. Great. So in terms of Snowdonia-Active, some of you will have come across Snowdonia-Active before. We have been around since 2002. I've been with the organisation about 10 years nearly now, I think it is this year. And we're a social enterprise, and we are established to promote the sustainable development of activities. So a lot of the work that we do, we sort of coin with the phrase reconciling conservation and recreation. So this, the work that we do is very much about upskilling the activity providers so that they're more aware of the special qualities of the environments that they operate in, but also communicating best practice that providers most of the time already are doing with land management and conservation organisations, and helping with that kind of two-way communication. So there's been a long history of working to sort of this kind of work that we've been doing right back from about 2008, when we produced the first DVD, as it was then. It doesn't exist so much anymore. We've got of groups in gorges. So again, communicating best practice in gorges. We've done some work on sea kayaking that's similar, and also coasteering. And then in 2012, we formalised this and we produced the Environmental Charter, which is a document which promotes best practice. And for about 3 or 4 years, we had regular meetings with providers, which were a great way to ensure that sort of two-way of communication, a great way to be able to, if any issues did arise, they could be dealt with. It was a great way to share resources and training. Unfortunately, for the meeting side of things, we never managed to get any sort of sustainable funding. But what we have continued to do is get funding for projects on a kind of bit by bit basis. So projects like this one, which is about working with providers. We've had many environmental training sessions over the past sort of 10 years. We've produced resources like the one on the right, which is a waterproof resource funded by the Anglesey AOMB. And that sort of is basically a useful tool for you to be able to take on activities, to talk to your group about the environment, the different things that you'd come across. We've done some work with organisations like NRW, looking at impact assessment, so ensuring that recreation is sustainable, because this is our livelihood. We want to be able to keep accessing these environments. So actually, what level can these venues cope with in terms of the usage? We've got long-standing relationships with sort of many of the conservation organisations, land management, Welsh Government, in terms of communicating again sort of how activity providers operate, and vice versa. But also what probably a lot of people don't know is that we work regularly with 2 other similar organisations across Wales, the Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum and the South Wales Outdoor Activity Providers Group. So in terms of sharing best practice and learning from what they've done as well in other areas, whether it be for coasteering, sea kayaking, gorge walking, it's a great kind of business relationship that we have in terms of being able to share best practice and learn from what's been done in other areas. Right. So in terms of Ynys Cybi as a place, and in terms of why is this so special? Why is it that we're actually come about to do this kind of work? you know, something I suppose I didn't particularly think about so much is, you know, starts with the name, in terms of the high concentration of kind of historical features that are in the area. So some of the work that we'll be doing will be to sort of highlight what actually is around so that we can share that knowledge with the clients that we're working with. It's quite a special area of heathland and farmland, and in terms of the project that Evan explained a little bit of, one of the projects is to sort of conserve that for its importance towards wildlife. Many of you will know, particularly because whether you're climbers or coasteers, you know, with the rare bird life that are actually sort of will gravitate towards the cliffs that are in the area, and some of this work will be to sort of identify, you know, the patterns of use and also patterns of nesting and patterns of where, you know, wildlife is most regularly seen. The area itself has got a designation, of wildlife designation. So in terms of, you know, it's protected by law in terms of, you know, how important the area is. And also there is already some great work that's been taken, you know, that's already taken place, which Elvin will elaborate on in a short while, in terms of kind of voluntary agreements that are in place to avoid certain areas when nesting is taking place. So in terms of the project outputs and this package of work that we'll be doing, we'll be working with providers to agree on a voluntary code of conduct or best practice, really. Like I said, a lot of, you know, the way in which people operate already. Trying to admit somebody at the same time as, oh, I don't think I can. Sorry, Steve. So we'll also be developing site guides for specific venues. So Evan alluded to these. So Mynydd Tŵr, Holyhead Mountain, and also Penrhyn Mawr, the range. And when I say site guides, Snowdonia-Active produced them in the past. The ones that we're going to do are not going to be quite as graphically designed as these. I'll show you a couple more later, similar to ones in Pembrokeshire. But the idea is that, you know, a map, the site guide will have a map. It will be able to show you where specific features are along routes that might be used to draw attention to, you know, something that either you might be able to share with your group, but also something that might be particularly sensitive, and actually to operate in this area, it would be good to perhaps avoid that at certain times. And also just general information, like I mentioned, it's particularly special for the historical features in the area. So we'll try and put as much into these guides from a kind of how the areas should best be used in terms of a kind of sustainable and wildlife point of view, but also information in there that you can actually use to share with your groups to enhance your sessions. Environmental training throughout the providers. So we've done plenty of this over the years, where it's quite often just as simple as going out on the route that we use with those that are experts. There's no necessarily a plan to the session in terms of we're going to, it's just very informal, you know, an opportunity to ask questions. And we just find that, you know, we can have only traveled a few meters, and there's just so much discussion because there's just so much interest, you know, from providers. It's just regularly learn from providers that there's such an appetite for knowledge, but actually, you know, without having these sessions, they wouldn't necessarily know some of this information to share with clients. And also to produce a waterproof resource. So some of you will have seen this that we've produced in the past. So this is a kind of buoyancy aid size resource, and inside it, it's got you know, information on very kind of bite-sized information on factoids to share with clients, and some wildlife ID. The guide that we're going to produce is going to be more specific to the actual areas, whereas this was North Wales coast, so it was quite general. So in terms of the outputs that we're going to do, but in terms of the outcomes, so in other words, why we're actually going to be doing this work. So from an activity provider's point of view, we're hoping that through this piece of work that your knowledge is enhanced in terms of the wildlife, the heritage in the area, historical features, site designations, you know, what are they, what do they mean, you know, why any agreements are put in place, you know, that dialogue, so who manages and conserves the area, how and why. You know, we hope for conversations on ethics to be considered, you know, throughout this project as well, because while something might not be in law that you maybe operate in a certain way or don't, as we know with other, you know, with a range of outdoor activities, ethics do come into that, and what other providers feel are appropriate and not, and just to ensure that levels of use are sustainable, which is ultimately, you know, what this project's about. From a wildlife perspective, you know, we hope that to contribute to the project on a wider whole, so increasing the number of choughs nesting in the area, to enhance heathland, to enhance the resilience and protect against wildlife loss. So again, just kind of conveying that understanding of why that's important. And these are areas that we will regularly, you know, pass through as we're accessing activities. And then from a land manager point of view, you know, through the kind of dialogue and conversations with the providers, a better understanding of where and how they operate, types of group sizes, and, you know, hope to have discussions around that as well in terms of what's appropriate and what people consider to be, you know, ethical. And then just consideration on parking and changing as well. So, you know, again, this comes back to most providers, you know, are operating in a way that's respectful of others, but we're just sort of formalizing, you know, what's happening. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to, so we've, as I said, I moved Evan a bit earlier up the schedule. So if it's all right, I'll hand over to Elvin now. I'll just turn off my screen share. Are you there, Elvin?
I am indeed, noswaith dda. Diolch am y gwahoddiad. Thank you very much indeed for the invitation. I know quite a few people on the call from various sort of contacts they've made over the years. Yeah, I work for the British Mountaineering Council as the Access and Conservation Officer for Wales. So much of my work is involving sort of negotiating access and agreeing codes of conduct really between landowners, conservation bodies and recreational climbers, hill walkers, mountaineers. Much of what we do and activities that we carry out are on sort of land that's obviously privately owned, much of it, and much of it is also really sensitive from an ecological and environmental perspective, with the sort of multitude of issues that comes with that. And some of you are obviously very aware of climbing issues, a lot of names I say I'm familiar with on this call, but a little bit of sort of very quick potted history of how the BMC got involved at sort of Gilgarth and Ynys Cybi, South Stack, is that climbing started there in the early 1960s, and then very quickly became some of the most popular sort of sea cliff climbing, really anywhere in the world. And at the time, it was still renowned. It was known even then as being a very important sort of bird sort of nesting, bird breeding site. And even in the 60s, there was a little bit of conflict at that time between climbers and conservationists, particularly bird watchers, as they were then called in those days. And from that, some agreements, I think they were possibly the very first agreements ever negotiated, potentially in the world, I think, between climbers and sort of conservation bodies. And in the 1970s, formal agreements were put in place that climbers would avoid certain identified areas with, where birds were nesting. And these were places like, those who know the area, the Red Walls area, Mousetrap Sawn, and some of the other areas of South Stack cliffs. So those agreements have been put forward as exemplar sort of models of how sort of recreation and conservation can coexist. And those can be tweaked. I mean, they are voluntary agreements and they are tweaked annually. And on the climbing areas, I meet with landowners, conservation bodies on an annual basis, and we tweak the restrictions as needed every year. And we then highlight those on a website on a thing called the Regional Access Database. And that information is live every day. I mean, I literally go into that system and my colleagues do it every day to update that information. And that's also then passed to all the people who write guidebooks, articles, etc. And yes, not everybody will stick to those agreements. They are voluntary agreements. However, they are underpinned by legislation as well. And if somebody recklessly or willingly sort of goes against that agreement and does disturb a protected species, then they could be prosecuted, and that has happened in the past. Not in Gilgarth, South Stack that I'm aware of, but it's certainly happened in other parts of the country, because the species involved and the habitats involved are sort of have got national and international protection in the law. So it is enforceable if needed, but thankfully that's very rare, not usually needed. And I think it's seen as a success, I think, both by the recreational users and by the land managers and the sort of conservation bodies. I don't think any conservation body land manager wants to be policing this sort of thing on a daily basis and chasing people. And I think we're finding these days that a lot of the birds that are nesting in places that often the conservation people may not know about, they're initially reported to the bodies by climbers who can access these sites. So now a big element of self-policing now goes on, and generally is regarded as being a very successful model to work to. So I think that's all I'm going to say about it really at the moment. I think many of you are already aware of these agreements. The key thing is that they are agreements, they are voluntary agreements, but as I said, they are underpinned by by criminal law if necessary, but hardly ever is that used. But happy to answer any questions if anybody's got any.
Yeah, Kelvin. Yeah, if anybody's got any questions at this point, feel free to ask. Nope, you got off lightly there, Alvin. Obviously done a good job. No complaints. Great, thank you for that. We're now going to hear from Laura Kodelska, who's from the RSPB. Hi.
Hello, can you hear and see me?
Yes, I can hear and see you. Thank you. So we've invited Laura to talk tonight because we're going to be working quite closely with Laura on this piece of work. Just to sort of talk a little bit from the RSBP's point of view of where they see any concerns of the area, but also opportunities to work more closely with the outdoor activity sector in terms of what this piece of work is going to start. So thanks, Laura.
Okay, thank you. So some of you may know me from about 2016 when we initiated a conversation about the potential to work with outdoor users, specifically down on the range. And at the time we were looking to do some training in the wildlife awareness, but unfortunately the Beach from the East came and then COVID, so we weren't able to roll it out any further. So those of you that haven't seen me before, it came off the back of some concerns that were raised in the local community and with Natural Resources Wales, who are Welsh Government when it comes to ensuring that the legislation and the work that we do at the nature reserve is done in the right way, that there may be some impact on that from the number of users that we were seeing on the site at the time. And the way that we monitor that is by surveying what we've got on the reserve every year, going back to 1977 when the RSPB first started land managing the area, and seeing if there was any changes in the trends of where animals were breeding and growing and what those potential impacts could be on it. And we were noticing it was the number of people that were coming down at specific times of year that were impacting on some of the areas that might be a cause of concern in the future. And if we could communicate better from our end with the people that were using them, those areas as to what was there, then we stood a better chance at working together and understanding the community for wildlife and for people down on the range. And what we'd like is for wildlife to be thriving and for all our visitors that come there to enjoy it at its best. And the only way to do that is to work together to do it. So the range, or Penrose Value, is protected right down from the reefs under the sea all the way up to the base of the cliffs, along the cliff lines and across the top of the land. And we manage all the areas that stick out of the water, and we've got that lease from Anglesey County Council, and there are key species, they're called, that are nominated to make the area special. And South Stack is 80% of lowland coastal heathland in the UK has disappeared now. And there's only a fraction of it left across Britain, and South Stack's a really important site for it. So it's really, this is why it's all been designated. And the reasons within that designation then goes right down to the tiniest of plants that we might have growing there that don't grow anywhere else in the world. And of course, they're scattered throughout the nature reserve. So when people create new footpaths running from a car park to get to the top of a cliff, they could very easily be going through an area where there's something growing that they don't know about. We don't tell people where those things are because we don't want to headline them towards them in case they dig them up or pick them or do something to them. So having that line of communication from users understanding what they might be walking past and seeing is different to advertising the things that we've got there and the things that we want to do. And so hopefully through this project, we can start to work together with people to get a better understanding of where to put kit bags down at the top of the cliffs, because we do have South Stack fleaware that doesn't grow anywhere else in the world on the cliff line on the top of one of the areas that's used for coasteering. And I'm pretty sure nobody wants to put a kit bag on top of a plant and crush it, but it's so easily done when you don't know where it is. So it's just a case of sharing that knowledge and understanding right the way through to behavior of some of the amazing wildlife that you see when you're down there as well. You know, we've had reports from climbers over the years which have been phenomenal, helping us to get a better understanding of where wildlife is on the reserve. And unfortunately, it's a slightly different relationship that we're getting from people that are using Penrose Value, rather than it being we've been to see this and to let us know. Quite often we're not being communicated with about things that are seen down there. If a seal's seen on a beach, what's it doing there and why is it behaving in that way? We're monitoring them, so we know when they're born, we know how old they are, we know what stage mum's going to abandon them and they're ready to go out to sea. And we're very conscious that some of our seal pups end up on the beaches where users are using those beaches, and they do come to see us and they're not sure if a pup's been abandoned or if it's because someone's been down on the beach looking at the pup, how close can you go to a pup, and so on. So it's just getting a much more fluid conversation going on with everybody about that. And as Elvin said, there is a legal element to this from our end as well. So, you know, we do have an obligation to ensure that the animals are being protected and that the cliff line's being protected. If we want to put a camera in a chuff cave, for example, I have to go to Welsh Government and request that a climber goes into the cave to put a camera on the wall, because we can't damage the rocks, we can't drill holes in them or put things inside the rocks without getting special permission, because they're all protected. And then we're not allowed to go near that nesting site then until after the birds have bred. So it's just getting an understanding between, you know, the expectation that we're following under government guidelines and the expectation that we're asking other people to help support us with, so that these animals and these plants are here for everybody to enjoy in the future. So opportunity wise, we're really hoping that it'll be exciting to do something like this in North Wales and on Anglesey, because it worked so well with the BMC, with climbers, and that we get this better relationship going with everybody, and that everybody has a much more enjoyable time understanding the environment that's around them. And it can get really exciting, because I know that a lot of you are down there a lot and you see loads of really amazing things. Sharing that knowledge would be absolutely fantastic. So does anybody have any questions?
Thank you for that, Laura. That was yeah, really interesting. And I think just even hearing from you then, some of that stuff, it's exactly what we want to be doing as well. And again, it's about this beginning this conversation. And I think you know, the type of work that Snowdonia-Active, often the projects that we get involved in, it is about this knowledge transfer, you know, or like I mentioned earlier, providers want to know what, you know, why areas are special. They want to look after areas because, you know, it's their livelihood. We know that these areas are special. We want to keep them special. And it's as simple as communication. And, you know, hopefully this is the start of it. And in terms of like then communicating with our clients as well, you know, from a enhancing your session point of view, if you can tell them a little bit about, you know, what something is or how special things are, even if, like, you know, you mentioned there's places where that's only there in the world, we don't have to actually point it out, but even just telling them that it could be seen, or, you know, it's in that area, you know, it does enhance a session, but also it kind of enhances that connection to nature. So in terms of the session, you know, a lot of people come to coasteering to seek the kind of adrenaline side of things, but actually being able to share a bit of this enhances the session, and they can then get this sort of extra knowledge about the area and connect them, you know, more to nature and more in terms of sort of encouraging that sense of place. So that was great. But yeah, anybody got any questions at this point? Feel free to either put it in the chat, I'll keep an eye on the chat, or you can put your hand up or just speak out. Okay, thank you, Laura. That's great. So I'm just going to jump back to my presentation now. I might just keep it. People do keep just arriving, so we're on 40 now. So I can't admit people while my presentation's up. So I think I'll just keep it like this. Yeah, and then can you see a presentation? Just nod, anybody that I can see on the video. Yeah, okay. Great. Actually, we'll play this slide because it kind of, you can't really see that. Okay, so in terms of the code of conduct, how we've got to where we are now. So we've taken learnings from other code of conducts that are in place. So some of you may be aware, if not, of the Anglesey Marine Code. So that does slightly focus a bit more on motorboat operators, but actually a lot of the detail in there in terms of what to do when you see wildlife, sort of nesting restrictions, that kind of thing, are in the Marine Code and relevant to all activities. Many of you on this call will be or have had something to do with the National Coasteering Charter. So there is a code of conduct that's been written. So in terms of that, we've tried not to veer too much away from what that's saying. And then in terms of the three organisations that I mentioned, so ourselves, Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum and the South Wales Outdoor Activity Providers Group, we've all got these environmental charters. As a kind of collaboration, we came together a few years ago to come up with Wales Enviromark. It wasn't necessarily something that was that's necessarily been widely uptaken, but as you can see from these documents, nothing is particularly, you can read it on the side, is it's a lot of what groups do anyway. So in terms of and also, again, some of you may be familiar with the work that's been done in Pembrokeshire with the coasteering concordate. So most of the venues down there, they have more coasteering venues than we have up here. Most of them are National Trust. This kind of idea of this is a site guide that they have in Pembrokeshire. It's less sort of graphically designed than the ones that we've done up here, but it's perhaps a lot more about the management of sites. So like specific agreements that have been put in place. So you can see here, you can see where the seasonal nesting restrictions, you can see where there's sort of seal pupping and when that's likely to be. So we're hoping to map some of this as part of this project, but also to include a level of kind of learning for providers to pass on to clients, but a lot of the site guides will include some of the kind of operating and management side things of sites. So that'll be something that will be created in collaboration with both providers and land managers. So this was the point when I was hoping to get everybody to say who's who, but we have got 40 on the call. I'd just like to welcome anybody at this point. If there's anybody, whether that's from a kind of land management conservation organisation, if you want to say anything else at this point. I know we've got a few people on the call that are, in terms of anything else they feel towards some of the venues that we've considered.
May I say hello, I'm Guitar Roberts and I'm the lead ranger for the National Trust on Ynys Môn, and we've got a tenant on Porth Dafarch, and one of the things I wanted to ask about was the tenant raised concerns about the management of his livestock when there's a busy period in Porth Dafarch. He especially found it concerning when people don't realise that they are going through a grazed area to get to and from the cliffs. And I'm not particularly sure that it's the outdoor groups. I think it's a wider problem, but he did mention littering as well and the risk that poses to his livestock.
Okay, thank you. That's it's interesting that in terms of the livestock, because that's not, I mean, I'm going to go on into a minute some of the things that we've considered in terms of the code of conduct, but certainly if you are getting concerns from tenants and things, they're the people that we are wanting to ensure that there's no conflict between. Litter is something that did he mention types of litter? Whether it was?
No, I think it doesn't sound, because having experience in outdoor activities myself, it's hard to try and imagine how a group of coast-steerers would, for example, that's one of the main things in Porth Dafarch, how coast-steerers and kayakers and people who use the cliffs in that way would leave litter. So I think it's more of a general problem with people from that attend the beach, really. But I think our tenant has lumped out all the problems together when he reported to his concerns to us. So that's why I'm here, to try and get a feeling for how people feel.
And what we're hoping is that by having a code of conduct that providers have sort of voluntarily signed up to, is that then we can go back to tenants or other land users and almost make that distinction between commercial activity operators and those that are using it just on their own, and that actually they're aware that discussions are being had about some of these problems, so that we're able to I guess alleviate concerns that it's from the commercial outdoor activity sector side of things. Thanks for that, Guitar.
Thank you, Diolch.
Diolch. Anyone else? No.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, Alistair. Hi.
Hello. Yeah, my name's Alistair Patolo. I've been asked to represent Canoe Wales at this meeting. That's all I wanted to let you know.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on. So in terms of the code of conduct and best practice, you know, we'd like input. So, you know, at this point, you know, I understand there's quite a few on the call and I don't necessarily expect everybody to shout all at once, but, you know, if you want to put any comments you've got, any thoughts you've got into the chat function, then that's something that we will save and we can go back to at a later date. And, you know, a lot of this we will be following up with sort of individual providers, like in terms of, they know, you know, sharing contact details and that sort of thing. But obviously a big thing about the code of conduct will be that before developing venues for activities, that people know where to find out about ownership, because I think a lot of what we hear is that people just don't know where to go to find out who owns or who manages, or, you know, it can get confusing even if you know how to find out that information. And that Natural Resources Wales in a first instance would be the people to go to in terms of to try and find out the status of that particular site, and you'll get some sort of land management information from that. This commitment to learn more about the habitats and species and geology of a site and heritage. Again, I mentioned it a few times in the call, so about passing that on to clients and how that improves their experience, but also encourages the respect side of things. The site guides that we do come up with, we rely on, you know, providers sharing that with freelance staff as well. Quite often, you know, in terms of our communication network, we're well connected to those that run businesses or run centres. But, you know, we know that the freelance pool is big in North Wales. And for those to get this information, it's great to see a few on the call tonight. And I know that, you know, some businesses have shared, you know, this the links with them about getting here. So it's great that that's already starting. And also committing to working together to resolve problems. So obviously that's, you know, a big part of this. And again, I've said it so many times tonight, but about that kind of two-way dialogue between providers and the activity sector. So in terms of what we feel would go into this code of conduct, these are kind of, there's a couple of slides here. We've got, and the ideal would have been that we'd have met face-to-face tonight, and we'd have had a brainstorming session, and we'd have had, you know, people be able to split off into separate groups, because it is quite hard as a group of 40 to discuss on an online call. So hopefully in the next sort of, perhaps we're sort of envisaging that in about 6 weeks' time, after we've had feedback from tonight's meeting, that we will be able to hold a face-to-face meeting and actually be able to go into a bit more detail on some of the contents of this. So in terms of code of conduct best practice, one of the big things obviously being considerate, so keeping noise to a minimum, being respectful in terms of parking. Group size is an interesting one, because some providers will have differing ideas in terms of, you know, numbers. I mean, there might be, from a ratio point of view, is one thing, but also in terms of how many and we take through particular sites in one go. Respect for the changing and toilet facilities that are there. So in terms of what goes into the code of conduct, depending on what venues we're talking about, you know, that will be something that the specific sort of site guides will go into more detail of. But also this commitment to protect and enhance areas. So like Gito mentioned, litter. So in terms of, you know, taking all litter home, leaving a site cleaner than you found it, you know, it's good practice. And in terms of showing a group and demonstrating to a group that, then, you know, it would hope that then that would stick in their mind in terms of being able to encourage sustainable behaviours from themselves as well. Promoting the heritage and language during the sessions. So hasn't been talked about much, but, you know, we have alluded to using the Welsh names for the particular sites that we're using. And what we do find is, you know, I'm a Welsh learner, and I find it quite amazing how descriptive some of the Welsh names can be for wildlife. And actually, you know, we're not saying you're going to be delivering sessions in Welsh at the end of this if you're first language English, but actually if you're able to impart a little bit, then that can enhance in terms of the sort of the culture, the experience that they're having of being, you know, in a Welsh place. So in terms of the voluntary agreements that I alluded to on this slide, you know, again, like what Elvin said, this is all about agreements. And, you know, I don't want people to go away tonight and think that, you know, as a result of this, there's going to be any kind of curbing on, you know, the people being able to use venues. And actually, this is just about knowledge sharing. It's about understanding more about patterns of use and potential seasonality of when wildlife is more prominent, and ways in which we operate to be aware of that. We feel that as part of this project there does need to be a discussion on permanent fixtures that are used, and in terms of the ethics behind that, but not just ethics, in terms of the legal implications behind that, and the need to discuss any permanent fixtures before with landowners and land managers. I'd say most of this happens already, but keeping to established paths, and sort of as this project evolves, the importance of that. We know that that is the case in certain areas for certain reasons, but in terms of the management and enhancement of heathland in this particular project is, something that we hope to, convey. So they're kind of like the main bits. There's also like the sort of final element of it is about enjoying the place safely, and just we're not reinventing the wheel. There are already agreed messaging and agreed guidance out there. So in terms of the code of conduct, we would be alluding to or sort of referring back to those. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen because I can see a couple of people have dropped things into the chat. So okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, great. Is there anybody, in terms of the sort of content that would go into that, is there anybody that wants to make any comments on it, point out anything that's perhaps not been brought up, discuss anything that they feel shouldn't be talked about within a code of conduct?
Will the code of conduct, will the documents be bilingual at the end of the process?
For sure, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
We can share the document, if you like, in Plas Newydd, have it readily available to the public there as well, if you want.
Okay, that would be great. That'd be great. I think in terms of like the site guides, we wouldn't put those public because we wouldn't be wanting to seem to sort of increase public use of the venues. But in terms of a code of conduct, for sure, that'd be good to share.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, please.
You've talked about providers, and this seems to be aimed at people, taking people out and guiding them. But there's a group, for example, local canoe and kayaking clubs, who would also benefit from this information. Now, you've just said you're not going to make it public about some of the areas. Now, what I'm wondering is, well, does not making it public include some of the local canoe clubs?
No, I'd say that they would definitely be, we'd share with them, because it's, I guess, saying not make it public, just not putting it on a public website that anybody could find. But, these documents, like Canoe Wales, we'd encourage you to share them with anybody that you'd feel it'd be relevant to.
Okay.
And in hindsight, now you've mentioned that, they would, for the next meeting, it would be great to invite.
Okay. I'll ask one or two of the local clubs, I think. Okay.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. One thing I think shouldn't be in the code of conduct is group sizes, because I don't think this has any effect on whether they're making more damage or less damage. A well-managed group with multiple instructors can be literally any size, and as long as the instructors are managing it well, then it's still safe. You still keep to designated well-traveled routes. So I don't really see that as appropriate for going in the code of conduct.
What about for other users, do you think, in terms of like the code of conduct? Yes, one, it's about enhancing and protecting wildlife, but also in terms of minimizing conflict. I mean, do you think that there's anything to say on group size and to respecting other people using venues?
It's a hard one, because it's not so much the group sizes which are the problem. It'd probably more come down to how many groups they're actually going to send in there. So most providers probably work on 1 to 10, I'd say generally. But if you send in 80 in there, 8 groups in there, that's 80 people. That's not technically on a group size, that's on a number of your groups.
Yeah.
It would come across as. But then it depends where you're located and what you mainly do.
Yeah.
And for some people, that is their main business.
Yeah, I guess I just sort of envisaging, you know, ratios. Okay, like you say, there's more sort of agreed ratios 1 to 10 that people would stick to. But if someone was to take 3 instructors and have 30 in there, and there'd be 30 people waiting to jump off a particular jump, you know, and whether then that's holding up the group count. And I'm aware, you know, some will swim around certain areas to avoid that and leapfrog and that kind of thing. But, you know, if people agree that it shouldn't be in there, then it won't be in there. You know, it's not necessarily, it's definitely, you know, this is what we want to spark, is this conversation. So I think that's, again, an understanding from yourselves about impact it has and whether it does or doesn't.
Well, when I've worked with groups of, say, 30 in there, we have people have gone around us, but nobody's ever complained to us. Nobody said anything, oh, this is too big.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be quite interesting to hear from other providers, because I know a lot of providers do have the odd group which is extremely large. Say they've got a big stag group, or they've got a big party group, and those groups do come in large numbers. So I think it'd almost be hypocritical for some providers to say that. Sense.
Does anyone else have any other thoughts on group size?
I was Elvin here from the BMC. I was just going to mention there could be some nuances and subtlety of some of the agreements that might be needed, particularly during nesting seasons, where an activity can happen very close to a nest if it's passing through quite quickly and in a small group and not hanging around for a long time. So there could be nuances around that when it comes to group size, possibly to enable a lesser degree of restriction that would otherwise possibly needed or even required by law in some places. Similar agreements to what we've got for some abseiling access in Pembrokeshire, for instance, which are very close to chef sites.
Yeah, I'd be in agreement with Elvin on that one. At South Stack, I mean, we can have over, I've counted over 200 participants on one small section on the range, right in the middle of the bird breeding season, which from our end is much more impactful than, say, you know, a more scattered number of groups throughout the day in smaller numbers. So it can have some impacts that could be negotiated.
Thank you.
I mean, I think, I mean, also places like Porthdavaj are very busy at the moment, aren't they? And we don't even take the last 2 summers. There's been huge numbers of people out and the range, you know, coasteering and kayaking, and that's bound to have some impact. I mean, I think that's, in terms of the rocky shore ecology, it's probably, you know, quite resistant to a lot of stuff being bashed by southwesterly gales all the time. But I think the bird life, the stuff that's transient, is probably much more impacted by people coming through. And I think, you know, there were probably hundreds of people going through Porthdavaj coasteering in a day on some days last summer. And I think, you know, that is an issue. I mean, I don't know how anybody can restrict that in a public accessible location other than voluntarily, but it is a big issue. And it is a reason I kind of avoid it, really. But I'm sure other people do as well by going to the range or going to the right-hand side and what have you. But I think it's an issue for providers to be thinking about, really.
Sandy. Is there any, I mean, I guess a question for National Trust or RSPB, do you have any foot counters or anything at any of the venues that we've discussed? In terms of...
Not as of yet, but it is something that we could consider doing, certainly. And if we feel, if we speak with the tenant and find that the most used route is something that we should maybe either put a hard standing on to avoid further erosion, then that's something that we could look into possibly. But yeah, I agree, a foot counter going through the gate. I'm just thinking of our site in Porthdavaj to the left of the beach as you're looking out to sea. We could put a foot counter under the gate there possibly.
Because I know some of the gorge venues have got them in, and it is interesting to see. It's been particularly interesting seeing, coming out of COVID as well, increases in terms of from prior to COVID as well, because we all know what a busy year last year was. But also, I mean, you know, we've, again, through the work that we've done over the years, there's been more research done on the gorge environments, and obviously we are talking about different types of sensitivities, but actually that increased footfall doesn't necessarily cause more impact. It's more the way groups operate which causes more impact. So again, it'll be interesting coming out of this, some of the learnings along those lines that could come out of it. And also just going on the routes that providers use with those that are from the kind of land management conservation side to just understand about, patterns of use. And we've found that particularly in the gorges that, the sensitive areas are often the greener areas, which groups naturally would stay away from. So, I think I'm hoping that out of this, it is that kind of, a better understanding of the way in which they're operating mapped against wildlife sensitivities. Anything else from anybody? If anybody, go on.
Hello. I was just going to mention that there is supposed to be some visitor monitoring going on from Morley, isn't there, associated with the Morley project? Are you aware of that?
No.
Are you aware that there's the intent of putting 240 megawatts of tidal generation off Holy Island, 500 meters off the coast? And as part of that, they'll be digging up roads, the access road to Porthdawach, and they are also committed to monitoring visitor numbers on Holy Island to determine whether the impact of the project has any significant effect on the tourists into the area.
So what stage is that at the moment? Just
it's got a marine license and it's got Welsh Government agreement, so it's going ahead now.
Okay.
Can I just say for information that if anybody wants to find out more information about it, there's an open day at Trara Bay Hotel on the 1st of February from I think 11 till 6 in the evening.
Thank you.
Alistair, can I just come in? Obviously, we've been, I haven't personally, but I know officers within the council have been working with Morlais, and they have mentioned the tourism surveys that they've carried out. And we were a bit apprehensive whether they'd actually done those surveys. So it'd be interesting to know from anybody who's here tonight if they've been approached whilst at any of the car parks on Ynys Cybi by anybody representing Morlais.
They haven't used any of our 5 car parks, and we've got obviously 3 at Southstack and 2 on the range, but they haven't. Yeah. We are just about to put a visitor counter project in, so we could do one on the range. Actually, we weren't going to do that, but no, Morlais haven't approached us at all.
Just to let you know that Morlais have recently produced a document, their monitoring strategy, which contains some results of the monitoring they did, I think, last summer. So that information is available. If you want to have a look at it, I can provide that.
Great, thank you. Could you just drop in, I have made a note of it, Alistair, but would you mind just dropping in the chat the meeting that you just mentioned? Would that be okay, please?
Sure, yeah, okay.
Just having a little look through the chat. Kathy's asked about where you can access the training and environmental resources being discussed. Snowdonia-Active.org is where all of our resources are, and I can follow up this with a few links so that people know where to find those. The actual physical copies of the resources, so the iSee guides, we've got North Wales Coast, North Wales Uplands, we've got North Wales Rivers, Llangollen Canal, sounds slightly random, but Canal and Rivers Trust paid for it. So they're all physical copies that they're all waterproof, and they're all in Snowdonia-Active office, which is Caban in Bryn Rhyfel. So if anybody's ever passing, you can get hold of those. Or I'm based in Bettws, so if it's closer to people, we've got plenty of copies here too. Okay, the the site guides that we discussed, they're just PDFs, so you'll be able to download and share them with your staff. Lots of talk about parking and toilets, definitely take that on board. Great people offering to in terms of training, which is fantastic. Okay. Anything? Go on, Mebon.
I was just going to say, for everybody who has noted about parking fees and the toilets, that through our tourism team there is a review not just for Ynys Cybi, but the coast, Anglesey coast in general, into what service is available, what state it's in, and what can be done to improve it. So that will be happening over the next 6 months. So hopefully, you know, I know you're going to say it's going to be too late by then, but the hope is that we can get stuff moving, certainly on the very busy toilets anyway.
Is there a chance of using money through the lottery funding on Ynys Cybi to improve facilities in Porthdadoc and Roscommon?
I'd like to say yes, but unfortunately no. The cost of doing any improvements to the toilets would be extremely prohibitive for us through our programme, Andy. It's not cheap. I think when people were looking at the Trather Bay toilets, it wasn't short of $250,000. And that would just take away, you know, literally a large chunk of the money that we need to do the other schemes.
Thanks for the comments up in the chat. Anita mentioning about education on the chuff. I think we've got another project people will be interested in. We're working with the Canada Landscape Partnership as well. We've got a series of Train the Trainer events. So if you're interested in attending some of those, then again, drop me an email and I'll pop you on the mailing list for that. But we've had conversations with RSPP and just the phenomenal work that they're doing in terms of monitoring the chuff, and actually the app that you can go onto to find where pairs of chuff are at any particular point. It's pretty amazing, really, because Laura, I'm sure you know much more about this than me, but in terms of believe that the majority of them are tagged, is that correct, or all of them?
We've got colour ringing program. Adrienne does a colour ringing program, so we can identify a lot of the chuff. But we've just trialled up at South Stack a GPS unit on a chuff, so they can follow it wherever it goes, to help track them through the
And see its journey, can't you?
Yeah. It's amazing watching the mapping. You can see where they've been eating and where they sleep and everything. Yeah,
it's amazing. It's great. Okay, if I've missed anything in the chat that anybody wanted to actually talk about, here we go. What could be done if an adventure activity provider chose to ignore all best practice codes produced and operated dangerously in popular areas? Would this be a matter for the council, police, or environmental health? Good question. This is something that I've experienced, not with a coasteering venue, well, possibly, yes, with the coasteering venues. And the advice that was given was to raise it originally with environmental health, because they're not operating on their own site. But the then following up evidence was to take it with HSE, which we've done, but it's extremely slow process. So because of the way that activities, these are voluntary codes of conduct, and you know, people short of people having a license such as ALS removed, as far as I'm aware, people can't have their qualifications removed. So therefore would still be legally be able to operate and get insurance. Does anybody else have any other thoughts on that question? Does that help answer slightly?
I believe you can get your qualifications removed if you've been acting unsafely. However, if it's the person who I believe it's referencing, I'm not sure he has got qualifications or insurance, and you don't need insurance to be able to operate anyway, which is where I think the big problem comes in. In fact, you can just operate without anything, assuming you've got the kit. Yeah, but yeah, you can have your qualifications removed if you've been using them inappropriately.
Okay, but like you say, if as far as a customer doesn't necessarily check if somebody's got insurance, or if they've said that they've got particular qualifications, we'll actually check if they have, which causes a problem.
Of course, as I mentioned, you know, when I spoke earlier, the any deliberate or even reckless disturbance of a sort of protected species is a criminal offence anyway in itself, and people can and have been prosecuted for that and end up with a proper criminal record for that. including up to 6 months in jail, I think, for a maximum offence.
Yeah, you can get a £20,000 fine as well. So, for example, if you were if you damaged the cliff line at South Stack as a triple SI, it could be taken to court and you could get prosecuted for that. And the same for disturbing a bird that's nesting. So it would be very much based on an individual case and the evidence to prove that they've done it.
I think potentially the person referring maybe from more of a safety point of view, I think, but which obviously does complicate things. How do we view the mentioned RSPB reports, Laura, produced on changes to habitats and wildlife usage along the coastline over the years?
We don't release them as a report. We do annual reviews internally, but if you request specific information, we can give it to the individuals that want to know it, mainly because it contains sensitive data, and some of our species are protected by law, so we're not to let people know where peregrines and so on are nesting. So they're not reports that we actively distribute.
Okay, question back to, sorry, 'cause this came in just after I saw that. So Greg's saying that how could such evidence be gathered? So yeah, I suppose in terms of, if we go back to wildlife impact, how would one expect to compile evidence to present in terms of somebody misusing venues?
So I've never been involved in a criminal case. I've done some work with NRW when we've had concerns over damage, and it would be a case of reporting any eyewitnesses that's seen anything and any photographic evidence that you've got to say that it's happened, similar to a normal criminal case would be. And we would get the wildlife investigating officer involved as well.
Okay. And thank you, Alvin, for answering that as well. Sarah's asked, what about permanent fixtures? So I'm assuming because that's been written in the chat, talking about damage. Does anybody want to comment on permanent fixtures in designated areas?
So we've had agreements with the BMC about permanent fixtures in areas of the Triple SI, where Natural Resources Wales came out and gave something we call a consent. So that's basically making an agreement in an area where the climbers wanted to use that would be less damaging to the wildlife by putting a permanent fixture in. And then that consent is held on record against the Triple SI by NRW to show that approval was given to somebody to implement that. And we would normally do that through myself as the site manager and land manager, contacting Natural Resources Wales with all relevant information of what equipment would be used to implement it, a map showing where it would go, what material would be used, how many people would be on site at the time that it was put in, and then the justification for doing it prior to it having consent.
Yeah, the only fixed equipments the BMC has been involved with have been belay stakes at Penllyn Mawr, because some of the original ones were in areas that were particularly sensitive, with people congregating for abseil descents and placing gear, and it was very close to some of these sort of South Stack bathylit sites, and there was a real danger then as well of that being damaged. So fixed equipment, while there's ethical issues around some of it, it can also be used to manage and direct groups to areas that are less sensitive as well. So, you know, I'm thinking about some of these agreements as being not giving consent, but validating where we can go for activities rather than just where we can't go as well. So it's this, they can also be used positively. I'm not going to enter the debate now about the issues to do with liability and who's responsible for them. That is quite a legal minefield, and it's not as clear cut as many people might think it is. And that's a much more complex issue that we might need to explore a bit further at some point.
Thanks for that, both. Okay. If there's anything else anybody wants to say, then say now or forever hold your peace. This is just the beginning of these conversations. So, you know, to have so many part of this, and is fantastic. And I know that there's still many that couldn't and would have liked to come tonight. There's people that have missed in terms of our invite list. So I think in terms of where we go from here, I think we'll sort of try to draft up a bit more the code of conduct and circulate for some further comment, because I'm aware that not everybody's had a chance to say anything tonight, with a view to, in about 6 weeks' time, meeting in person before things start to get too busy for everybody. In terms of, for a couple of people have asked in terms of training, so the training is going to accompany this project. So, you know, if you've attended this, you will get notification of that. If people want to be on our wider circulation newsletter, Snowdonia-Active, to hear about other events, then please follow up with me and get in touch. We've got, as I mentioned, the Carneddau Landscape Partnership training sessions coming up. And we've also got, we're working on a piece with NRW at the moment on gorges and canyons. So you're likely to be hearing quite a bit from us over the next couple of months. I'll just have a little check to see if anyone else has popped anything else in the chat. Interesting conversation about insurance and licensing. How is best to get in touch? Okay. I'll just pop on my email address so you've all got it. And I think, Evan, you shared yours, but I could, what I'll do actually, probably easier, I'll just follow up this meeting with some of the things that were mentioned in terms of resources, and then the emails addresses of everybody that contributed, if that's okay with those that contributed. Okay. Evan, anything else from you?
No, thank you, Catherine. I think that's covered a lot of stuff in a very short time, really, considering, you know, it was a lot of stuff to get through in an hour and a half. But there's lots of interesting questions that have come up. And I think, as you said, the next thing now is to sort of bring a code of conduct together that we can share with people, and then we have more of a face-to-face meeting to go through that then, which will give people a better chance to voice their thoughts.
As if it was if we were just on cue. Well, Mum's
you coming down.
2.
So,
okay.
Bedtime.
As if on cue, and you can't even tell the time. It is bedtime. Fantastic. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, there was lots to cover, and you know, I would like more, you know, discussion, debate, which is why we'll push for another meeting, sort of, you know, in a few weeks' time, so people can have that good excuse to get together. Well, thank you, Jeff and Pal. Thanks for giving up some time on a Monday night and for everybody inputting. This meeting has been recorded and we'll be producing some notes from it. I'll likely to post the presentation on our Facebook page so that anybody that wasn't able to attend could have a quick flick through that. And I'll follow this up with some resources and contacts. Okay.
Lovely.
Great stuff. Okay. I'm just going to save the chat before I leave, so feel free to leave. I'm not just hanging about. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.